Welcome to a new episode of Policy Implications podcast, where policy meets research. I'm your host, Olha Zadorozhna from Kozminski University, where I teach and do research in empirical economics. My guest today is Bogna Gawrońska-Nowak, who is a professor and an economist at the Institute of Urban and Regional Development in Poland and an expert on international finance and trade. Currently, Bogna works as a principal investigator in a project called A New Model of Urbanization in Poland, financed by the National Center of Research and Development. Today, we will be talking about her upcoming book, which is a part of that project, and is called Defining the Boundaries of Urban Areas, Socio-economic Gains and Losses of Urbanization Processes in Poland, that she has been an editor of and has written several chapters in. So welcome, Bogna, and let's get started. Before we move on with the discussion of your new book, tell us about your research expertise and why did you become interested in the topic of urbanization?
Hello, Olga. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to you and have an opportunity to discuss a little bit our research outcomes. Well, as you mentioned, my focus area is international economics, but as you may know, the very recent tendencies of urban growth are so amazing, and I think that they have an influence on all of us. I mean, like by 2050, 68% of the world population is projected to live in urban areas. Well, that's quite a lot. This data come from United Nations. Well, today 55% of people live in urban areas. So I mean, it's really hard to be neutral, and I think that, you know, as a social scientist, because I always been very much interested in treating what I'm doing in a bit more interdisciplinary perspective. So being a social scientist, I can say, as probably again quite majority of us, that lots of things are happening in the cities, bad things and good things. And well, if we're talking about this fascinating, according to my opinion, tendencies, by 2030, the world is projected to have 43 mega cities. Well, with really more than 10 million inhabitants in each of these mega cities. So imagine, and well, most of course of these things are going to happen in developing regions. Well, which again tells us something about probably a new geography of new special tendencies of the global economy. So, well, this very simply defined tendencies, I think that they provide us with very complex issues. I mean that this population, this growing population, they will behave as sometimes homo economicus, sometimes not really, right? They produce lots of things, not only material effects. It causes very interesting social problems, issues that are supposed to be analyzed. So, well, maybe I'm now trying to answer your question in a bit too long way, but putting all things together, this is exactly why I became so much interested in those things. Simply, I don't believe that you can ignore cities, its existence, its dynamics, its development. So this is how it happened. And referring to my current research, the project that you mentioned, well, I must say that I was invited as an expert, but not purely economist only, but rather because of my inclination to do things in a bit interdisciplinary way. Because, well, geographers, Institute of Regional and Urban Development that actually I work for, finally, invited me to design some kind of methodological approach towards analyzing urban sprawl, city sprawl, well, suburbanization in other words, and city shrinking, depopulation in Poland. I think that it was really good that they decided, well, being very much dominated, the team previously by geographers, that they decided to add some new perspective, more social and economic aspects. So, well, I treated this a little bit as a challenge, and I join in.
Excellent.
So that's my story.
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually, especially those facts and statistics that you mentioned about growing cities and their size and number increasing. So, what about your book project? So, what are the main highlights? What are the main things that you research about in your book?
Well, there are a couple interesting things to be mentioned here. Well, that book is a kind of, well, it's a result of our research. Well, I should probably say first what I mean by our, or what I mean by we, yeah. Because, well, yes, I designed quite a basic, I would say, idea of the methodological approach towards analyzing how city sprawls, how city actually goes beyond its administrative boundaries in Poland. But, well, I needed quite a number of people that would join in and would actually give me a hand in tackling with this and in facing this challenge. So, well, we have on board sociologist Krzysztof Gubański from University of Warsaw. We have political scientists, Jan Grzymski, again from University of Warsaw. We have a very dynamic team of economists, coming from Lazarski University, Dr. Anita Zarzycka, Dr. Piotr Najechalski, and, well, I have as well a pleasure to collaborate for this book with a former Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Jarek Neneman, who joined us with his very special expertise in public finance and financial aspects of the processes. And, well, certainly, well, we needed some excellent quantitative methodologists, econometricians, statisticians, and I'm smiling a bit because among that group of people, or rather very small group of people, because it consists of Piotr Lis, Coventry University, United Kingdom. You are the one. So you are the one of the member team that constitute that excellent, I would say, well, in my at least impression, team of people who were capable to tackle a very complex issue,
Well, thanks,
connected
Bogna.
with a city sprawl. So this is the team. You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, this is. I think we've done something quite innovative. So finally, answering your question, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit too self-confident, but this is not my personal characteristic. Only I have that self-confidence because of these people there behind me and the output of the research. I think that if we're talking about our contribution into understanding what's happening with city sprawl in Poland, I think we've done quite a nice job in terms of, first of all, a delineation task. You know what I'm talking about, and probably if I already revealed that you were one of the experts, we can discuss it together and describe it together. Maybe you can sometimes do it even better than me, being involved in and contributing so much into that project. But so far in Poland, the functional areas of cities, which are very often, I would say that all of the cities do have bigger functional areas than their administrative boundaries reach.
And
So
could you please define those functional areas? So what are they?
yes, well, functional areas, that means in fact that this is very much connected with this city sprawl issue. Well, the activity that people conduct, like they work, they run a business, right? They purchase houses in the suburbia. So that activities like producing, consuming, well, and we can be a little bit more descriptive about it, as I said before, they simply are spread around the city. Well, we all know that if we look at, for example, property market, yeah, the prices of dwellings, the prices of the whole property market of housing are incredibly high. This is not only Polish thing, we know. That's why, you know, people in the United States, for example, they live in the parking areas, in their cars, in the suburbia of the cities. These are the things that seriously are happening now. So the functional areas, they try to define people activity in proper and give us a proper understanding, therefore, what are the boundaries of the cities, yeah? Because, well, we could probably discuss for hours how to define the city boundaries, right? But what we are very familiar with, and probably that's our very intuitive understanding of the boundaries, I guess, is definitely something that is called administrative boundary, right? So this is something that the government, the policymakers, they have set, and what functions on a map, what functions for the policy making purposes, and so on. But the reality, so-called everyday life, if I may say it in that simple way, simply works in a bit different way. Sometimes, and this is exactly what is happening, those boundaries are not sufficient. They do not define the functional city map. So basically, that is functional area. Well, I guess that if you look what have been done in the literature, there are lots of interesting studies about delineation, because this is not an easy job to define how far the city actually go beyond administrative boundaries. Why is it not that easy job? Because first of all, if we are talking about functions, I probably mentioned at the very beginning a couple of these. I said people must work somewhere, so they commute, they send their children to schools, to kindergartens, right? So they can do it as well in some areas that are, well, somehow located in a distant way from the place that they live, yeah. People run business, they, for example, can locate their business in the suburbia and so on. Okay, but if you look at, for example, these three criteria that I mentioned, they are different, right? So now the immediate question is, which one of these is the most important one to define that functional area, and why, actually, yeah? So as I said, and plus, if we understand that the city changes, technological progress, yeah. If we now, like today, Olga, we are located in two different cities, and we talk about some important, I guess, things, yeah. But technology allows us to forget about the distance, the geographical distance. So if we think about, for example, city sprawl only in geographical, pure geographical, I would say, dimension, probably it is not that relevant as it used to be before. So maybe it is not only the question, if we want to understand how city functions, how functional area actually are working, it's not enough probably to consider commuting, so some geographical distance, which is given by our activities, physical activities, but maybe we should as well, for example, consider internet range and other things. So I talk about it quite long, but it's quite important, because if you do not understand that functional boundaries, if you do not understand what are the current functions of the city and how they actually work in space and in time as well, then what can you actually tell about city in itself, and how? Because I know this is your key subject in your program. Well, how can you design a just policy to actually somehow, yes. So okay, so what was innovative, I hope, and I think it is really like that. We tried together with you, Olga and Piotr, we tried to delineate actually those functional areas, not in purely intuitive way. Well, we were using our intuition, but well, let's be honest, we are not that much experienced in terms of being urban economists, right? So we were rather trying to look at other experts' intuition in that field. But what we tried to do was, okay, let's do it using data. Let's do it using statistical data, right? And I must say, and I would like to really underline that this is rather rare approach, at least if you look at what can Polish literature offer in that area, right? So I remember that it was quite a challenge for us, correct, to come up with quite a number of different methodological approaches.
Oh yes, it was.
Yeah, I may mention some of these, and I remember very well how you come up with one of these, and I would like maybe you to say a bit more about it. But we used threshold regression as methodological approach. We used the kind of discontinuity approach as well. And well, yes, it would be probably the best if you could say a couple of things about those approaches. What is so special about them? Now we change the roles. I'm interviewing you. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it goes both ways. Well, indeed, it was a challenge to define those boundaries using past data, because that's what we were doing, taking the data that we had, historical data, and trying to see whether there are any relationships that can lead us to those boundaries around the cities. What are they actually in the data? And so, yes, indeed, we use regression discontinuity design, we use the threshold regression, and also we use the combination of spatial modeling and the threshold regression. And I think we've got pretty far with that, because well, at least for now, I don't think anyone else has done something similar. It was quite innovative, and I think special thanks should go to Piotr, please, here, because it was he who developed this model. So basically, you want to see if any of the socioeconomic variables that you mentioned, like, for example, time spent commuting to work by people, whether it can help us define the boundary of the city, like the threshold value that divides the city and then non-city areas, non-functional areas of the city. We used also some other variables like number of people who live in a city. We used also the kind of like how many people per square kilometer live in the city, and also in the area close to the city. So we used many different variables, put them all into our model, and then we've got some nice results. And basically, on average, we see that the area around big cities, it's a bit different than the functional area around smaller cities. And yeah, I think that was quite nice to work on that methodology and develop those results. But once we developed those results, we went a step further, right? So we then tried to see whether the boundaries used in our first step, whether we can also use them to calculate the gains and losses of these suburbanization processes, or the processes of shrinking of the city depending on the city size. So can you maybe tell us more about those results now?
Yes, I can, but maybe for some people who are not that much familiar with all of these magic words that you use, like, threshold, regression, discontinuity, design, and so on, I just want very briefly to say that that was a kind of puzzle to be solved to an extent, because we needed some kind of approach which would allow us to define some critical distance from the core city, in which we think that that functional dimension of the city is actually present. I'm not sure if I'm if I'm saying it in simple and available way, but that was quite a job, right? Because the whole thing is that if you try to imagine city sprawl, you can think about some water simply. A water that is coming from some kind of source, original source, and it's got its flow, yeah? So if we look at the function of the cities in this way, like, for example, I don't know, setting up a business or commuting, yeah, we do realize that there is some kind of intensity of that process. So our main finding was to define the geographical distance in which we believe that the bond between suburbia and a city, well, more or less has got the same intensity, right? And we already know because, it's always very hard to say in a very simple way some results that are always a bit more complex than just one sentence, right? But I think I will not I will not exaggerate if I say that 30 kilometers range, of course, this is a big simplicity, yeah? But that 30 kilometers range is something that we discovered probably for quite a number of cities using different criteria as some kind of distance from the city center that we can actually treat as that critical area of that functional area boundary, right? We discovered that 30-kilometer distance as critical, quite critical. Of course, this is a big simplicity to say in this way, that that does not work for every possible city and every possible function. But I'm trying to simplify it and give a kind of average understanding of the geographical distance. So this is a bit controversial because we do have results of other authors. We do have results of other delineation studies that have been done in Poland. They are mostly basing on authors' intuition, but intuition is nothing bad. If expert is well experienced, then intuition plus his or her knowledge is something that you may rely on and you should rely on. But I would like to say that although we do not cover that in our book precisely per se, we have something that may confirm that that 30-kilometer distance is something which is quite, in fact, appropriate. Why is it so? Because we have opened a new chapter of our research, and together with Piotr, and I hope, Olga, that you will join shortly, we and Baptiste Bedessin, our French colleague from Ca' Foscari University from Italy, we have run a small quasi-experiment, in fact. We used the citizen science approach. Citizen science approach is something that could be interesting, I hope, for those who are listening to what we are talking about. Well, citizen science is simply inviting lay citizens to do research together with scientists. But it is really some kind of partner, I would say, invitation. So citizens may, for example, collect data, may co-design research. They can be very critical towards some kind of progress of the research. This is not that new approach. It was born in the United States. Especially, it was, I think that the beginning was when American people supported scientists in predicting natural disasters. They collected geospatial data to help to forecast that natural disaster. In this way, they seriously participated and contributed into that predictions. So, but nowadays, I think it's quite widespread, that approach. European Commission is promoting it very much to make lay citizens involved in research. So we try to use that approach. We invited people, citizens of residents, of inhabitants of Łódź and Kraków, and we simply explicitly asked them the question, okay, how you define functional boundaries of the city? How do you define functional area around Łódź, around Kraków? Of course, it was a bit more complex. We used survey for that reason. I'm not going now to discuss all these details. Our paper would be published soon in Journal of Contemporary European Research, so everybody can read it. But what I would like to emphasize is that, in fact, according to this people opinion, their actually understanding of those functional areas, those functional boundaries of the functional areas, was very much in line what we have, Olga, done together with you in terms of pure statistical or econometric research. They as well define the distances in very similar way, in fact. So why I'm emphasizing this? Because I think that this is the best confirmation that we can get. That in fact people, the real people who really exist in reality, they confirm that ties with the core city in a way we've done it using our econometrics. So so this is that belongs so much as a kind of postscriptum, I would say, yeah, of our research. We hope to develop that approach because, in fact, I believe that how people perceive the functional areas, how they perceive the boundaries, is extremely important.
Exactly.
So,
it is extremely important. And yeah, and coming back to the book and to the whole project, so what are the main policy recommendations that stem from this research, this complex collection of different questions, research questions and answers to them that you have collected in that book? What are the main policy recommendations for those who actually work with urbanization processes on a daily basis?
First of all, well, it seems like the process of city sprawl and city shrinking, and I will come back in a second to that latter thing. They are actually they are progressing over time. So they become more intensive and more visible, and therefore they really require some kind of intervention, right? Well, and that becomes serious. I think there is a huge change if you compare what happened in the beginning of the 90s in Poland, when all of us, we were so much happy and enthusiastic about unlimited freedom. Well, freedom is probably unlimited as an abstract. Well, that was fantastic, of course, yeah, and in many dimensions, but that kind of, liberty, that kind of freedom, I'm afraid that it did not actually pay off in terms of kind of urban order, kind of urban discipline, and therefore it is simply inefficient in many, many aspects. But I'm not discovering America, so to say. This is not something which is unknown to the urban planners, because these are very well known, actually, postulates to change the whole planning system in Poland, to implement new law that would be much more disciplined. So that's nothing new, yeah. What I would like maybe to stress out, which is as well not that new, but worth mentioning, is that Polish cities, they suffer from the process of simultaneously happening city sprawl, suburbanization, and city shrinking. The core city, the central city, is very often suffering from urban depopulation. Well, especially you may observe that for post-industrial cities. I mean, like Wałbrzych, like Łódź, those cities, they at the same time, they actually are experiencing a city shrinking and city sprawl. Well, that does not look nice, yeah, because then the very immediate next question is, right, whether that type of, I would say, urban growth may survive, right? Maybe some kind of a positive change over time. Maybe something which will have a happy ending in terms of kind of place in which there are some, activities, yeah, that whether this is a sustainable growth, yeah. So, well, I think that we can have serious concerns about it, yeah, and therefore it should be definitely analyzed, I guess, and that city should be targeted probably as those that require some special treatment, maybe some special policy recommendations. And I'm talking now about that central level, right? Because we do have very active local governments, and they are probably doing a quite amazing job. But at the same time, when we're talking about city sprawl, some local governments that are very much interested in attracting investment, they're doing very bad job, because, well, they create lots of favorable, I would say, elements of the environment, yeah, in the suburbia to attract investors. In this way, they make, of course, they gminas, yeah, wealthy, gmina, the administrative unit of Poland. But at the same time, well, they're very much responsible for city sprawl processes, yeah. But that we come back then again to that initial thing that I mentioned at the very beginning about central planning, some kind of necessity to introduce a new law on planning, right? So that's nothing, I would say, extraordinary that we have not been familiar with. Yeah,
So there are still some challenges left for the
definitely.
policymakers to resolve. Well, hopefully the next research, the upcoming research, will also help policymakers with resolving those issues. And hopefully we will continue this topic throughout next episodes. We will bring this issue further on in our podcast series. For now, thank you very much, Bogna, for
Thank
having
you,
this
Olga.
conversation with me. It was very insightful. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.